Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 203. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Gary Braver about his new book, Rumor of Evil. In this mystery novel, Gary weaves together two seemingly unrelated murders, one past and one present. Two police detectives catch a case of a woman's murder that is staged to look like a suicide. As their investigation unfolds, they discover clues leading them back to a decades-old murder of a teenage exchange student. In crafting this story, Gary was inspired by the 2014 true crime Slender Man case, from which he studied the profiles of both the bullied and the bullies. Gary believes the draw of the mystery genre comes down to the differences between true crime stories and fiction, namely that in fiction, motives become clear, and in the end, justice is usually served. In this episode, I'll chat with Gary about his writing journey, what his career as an English professor taught him about writing his own stories, and why he says it is important that the detectives have the most to lose in a mystery novel, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Gary Braver, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thank you, Stacey. Glad to be here.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new book, Rumor of Evil. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write it.
Okay, it is a murder mystery that has two narratives, one in the present, 40-something chapters in the present, and maybe a dozen chapters in the past. In the past, a 16-year-old exchange student from rural pig farm in Slovakia comes to upscale Lexington, Massachusetts, where the revolution began, which is not too far from where I live. And she is hosted by a family that has a teenage daughter about the same age. And she will be going to one of the schools in Lexington and learn about America. And the kids there, she will share her culture with them for 4 months or so. She is of Romani or Roma extraction, sometimes derogatorily called gypsies. Well, she comes and the kids have fun Americanizing her. They take her to the ball and get her really cool looking outfits and get rid of the funny kind of Eastern European braids on the side of her head. And they give her a cool American nickname, Lulu. And things go very well. They even bring her to a rock concert, Pearl Jam. This is like 20 years ago, Pearl Jam concert. And then things needed to turn dark. We're at a pizza party these kids have in the rec room of one of the kids' family homes. And one of the boys walks up to her and says, Lulu, when you're not slaughtering pigs back in Slovakia, what do you do for fun? And she says, we sometimes read palms. Says, like a fortune teller? Yeah. So all the kids turn their hands to her and she has fun just saying this one is going to go to college, this one's going to go to a seminary, the basketball team is going to win this weekend, and you're going to be the star. Finally, a girl comes up to her and shows her palms, and Lulu freezes. And she says, I can't do this anymore. And she takes her host girlfriend from the host family, and they go back home. And about a week or two later, things turn very dark. Some bad things began happening to her friends and the family of her friends, and that's when the rumors begin to fly, as in rumors of evil. Wait a minute, no, she's of Roma extraction, and aren't those gypsies? And didn't gypsies start the bubonic plague years ago? And don't they drink the blood of Christian babies and pray to Satan? And aren't they witches in disguise? So what I was doing is trying to capture the conspiratorial mind of adolescents. And on Halloween night, she likes sleeping in the backyard treehouse. It catches on fire and she is burned to death. So this is very suspicious. Now we move to the present time, and the current detectives are called into Cambridge, Massachusetts, nearby, and there's a woman hanging in her backyard. But the clues look like this was staged. This looks like murder staged as suicide. And that connects to the backstory as a potential cover-up for what went wrong 20 years ago on that Halloween night that ended in the death of our exchange student. So that's kind of a nutshell synopsis of Rumor of Evil.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for this book, what was the spark for you that started you on this journey?
Sure. That's a good question. I think most novelists of crime stories, thrillers, or murder mysteries have a file of true crimes. And I have one. Bizarre, unexplainable, just really strange real life crimes. And one of them that I had that stuck in my mind for years came out of 2014, out of Waukesha, Wisconsin. And you may have known, but the famous Slender Man case, where two 12-year-old girls lured another 12-year-old girl, their girlfriend, into the woods where they stabbed her 19 times. She survived, but the two assailants are currently still in psychiatric institutions. So I was really bothered by this. This is bizarre behavior for 12-year-old kids to have committed such a barbaric, brutal act. So I started looking into that and discovered, of course, everyone knows that one of the scourges of adolescent life is bullying. Kids are bullied, and there are bullies who just mock them and pick on them. And so I decided to study the profiles of both the bullies and the bullied. And the bullies are actually kind of alpha kids, really smart, and they want to show off to their peers that they're powerful and superior. And they always pick on an outsider, someone who is different, someone who's too fat, too skinny, too tall, too thin, speaks with an accent, that speaks with a lisp, et cetera, et cetera. And they often turn the other kids against this person. And the victim, the bullied, is someone who is outside to the norms of adolescent acceptance. So therefore, I decided to make my outsider Vadima Lupescu, otherwise nicknamed Lulu, from Slovakia, from a pig farm. She's bright, she is attractive, but she is uncool. And at first, they welcome her to her little their gang, but then when things turn dark, the mindset, conspiratorial mindset, she's a witch, she's dangerous, and something should be done about it. So that's where that story came from the Slender Man. And Slender Man, ironically, the reason the kids gave to the police is that they seriously believed that this faceless internet cartoon character known as Slender Man would kill their families if they did not sacrifice their girlfriends. So, I mean, it's that strange, dangerous, superstitious minds of these kids that, interestingly enough, Stacy, from 30 miles from where I live, Salem, Massachusetts, teenage superstitions and hysteria led to 19 people being executed for witchcraft. Yeah.
You told us a little bit about Lulu, who is one of your main characters in the book, but I'd like to talk about a few of the other sort of main characters, the ones that reside in the present day story. Can you fill us in, particularly on your detective team?
Actually, in asking about the detectives, I think most people realize that in a detective novel, the detective has got to be pretty sharp. You're not going to have a dummy trying to solve a murder.
It would be a really long book otherwise.
and one that's probably scrapped pretty soon. So the important thing about detective novels, what attracts people to the detective novels, is much more the detective than detection. They're going to expect that they're going to solve the crime of who left Charlie Brown's body in the opening scene. So to endear readers to the detective, you have to make that detective someone who has the most to lose in the novel. So you think of baggage that they have to have. I mean, there are two quests in any novel, no matter what the genre is. The outer quest or the public quest is, well, in the detective novel, it's who left that body in the opening scene. The personal quest usually involves baggage such as the main character, the detective, is an alcoholic or is hooked on drugs or feels estranged from a family loved one, a partner, kids, or they feel guilt because in the last investigation, their partner was shot or murdered. So they carry this baggage, and ideally, at the end of the novel, they solve the outer crime story and they are at a better place at the end with their personal stuff. So what I had in this case, I had to come up with the baggage for Kirk Lucian. And Kirk has been married to Olivia for 20 something years. And the issue I came up with is that their 14-year-old daughter, a year and a half before the novel opens up, was killed in a hit and run accident, never to be solved. So they both fell into a deep funk, but he became so dysfunctional in his grief and guilt because he's a protector and is supposed to save people, especially his daughter, that he could not attend the needs of his wife, Olivia. So this novel opens up where they're separated and they've dated since high school and now she's out dating other guys. And his personal quest, I want my marriage to come back again. I want Olivia living under the same roof with me. That would make me the happiest man. Otherwise, I may be braiding a noose like that woman in the opening scene. So that is the baggage I gave him. And as I briefly, his partner is a woman who was a uniformed officer. She's a woman married to a woman, and they have a child. And she is in a profession that is straight male. And so because she's a lesbian, and yet in liberal Cambridge, Massachusetts, she fits in well. And she's got, like I said, the prejudice against her because she's not a guy, not a straight guy. But so those two came together quite well, and those are my detective designs.
And you mentioned briefly earlier about taking your inspiration from real life crimes, real life scenarios. How much do you find real life seeping into your work other than just maybe the spark for an inspiration for a story? How much do you end up drawing on, how do you, in crafting your characters and setting your stories in a particular location and plotting it out? I mean, do you find real life really seeps in, or is it really, I'm making this up completely?
Yeah. I draw from my own experience. Kirk is married to Olivia, and in many ways, Olivia is my perception of my wife, Kathy. He is crazy in love with Olivia. That can be said about me and Kathy. So if he were to lose her, I cannot imagine losing my wife. We've been married for over 40 years and have two wonderful kids. That would be so crushing. It would be like trying to survive on one lung. I mean, I don't know how far I would go. So his issues are extrapolations from my theoretical issues if Kathy and I ever separated. The locales, I almost always have my stories set in Boston. I live outside of Boston, about 10 miles. And the locales are familiar. The nature of the culture is familiar. I often have college students because I spent 45 years teaching college. So I'm drawing from all those experiences. But then again, the difference between life and literature is literature has to make sense. So I fabricate crime novels that when they're resolved at the end, there is a sense of justice and closure and resolution. Real life doesn't give that. Even in crime, even in courtrooms for a crime story, you never get the real motives coming out. And so we make up motives for the villains because we really sometimes don't understand why people do bad things in real life. So I draw from what I've known or what I've experienced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you make an interesting point there. And based on your experience, I'm curious, do you find that that's one of the draws of this genre is people find things that are scary or disturbing, or they feel threatened in some way in the story,
Sure.
and yet they can find that satisfying closure many times, or even if it's not fully satisfying, it's at least some sort of closure that maybe they don't get in real life.
Yes. Nearly all of murder mysteries end with justice. I mean, the detectives and main characters may be sadder and wiser, but at the end, usually the crime stories have been resolved and bad guys are put away. But, life isn't like that. I mean, and crime is always around us and many times inexplicable. Whereas in books, I think motives become clear. I think I love my villains. I love them because I want to flesh them out. And I don't believe that a real bad person gets up and looks into the morning mirror and says, that's the face of evil. I think people who do bad things may have sweet smelling reasons for why they do bad things, such as they had crummy parents, bad parents, they got knocked around as kids. They are at odds with the socioeconomic neighborhood they're in. They're at odds with the law. They're at odds with the police. They're at odds with nature. Maybe they have some kind of defect. So when they do bad, or in fact, they're at odds with the fact they're poor. So they want to get back somehow, and they justify doing bad things, like robbing a bank or killing someone who may be doing a lot better than they are, or may have dissed them somehow. So I love my villains, but I flesh them out too. Yeah.
Well, your background, as you mentioned, is as a professor of English. I'm curious, can you maybe give us a quick tutorial on the difference between mysteries, thrillers, suspense? People use them interchangeably, I've noticed, when talking about books that just kind of generally fall into this kind of a category. But really, is there a difference? And is there one that we should understand when we're looking at a book?
Right, exactly. Good question. Publishers, bookstores, and libraries sometimes blur the distinction between mystery and thriller. In fact, on the book, I think the publisher wrote, "This is a mystery thriller." And Stacey, mysteries essentially are solving a puzzle, putting together the clues using deductive logic and nabbing the bad guy at the end. So it's driven by puzzle solving. A thriller will share many of the same features as a murder mystery. There'll be a crime. There'll be police forensic activities. There'll be good guys and bad guys. There'll be chases. There'll be maybe some romance. But what drives a thriller is not puzzle solving, but dread. You may know who the bad guys are. You may know they're going to set off a bomb in the Yankee Stadium. You can tell I'm a Red Sox fan. You know when they're going to do this. And so what drives the good guys, the FBI, the CIA agents, the private detectives, the police detectives, is trying to stop the mayhem from hurting or killing innocent people. But it is all dread that drives that story. And Rumor of Evil, the current narrative flow is of Kirk and Mandy. They're trying to solve who left Sylvie Thornton's body hanging in the opening scene. The backstory is the dread that is beginning to mount up. My God, she's a witch, and she did all these bad things, and she's put a curse on us. So in a sense, this is a murder mystery wrapped around a thriller. But the distinction is one is driven by puzzle solving, and thrillers are driven by dread.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
This is not, Rumor of Evil is not your first book, in case people couldn't tell by our conversation so far. So can we talk a little bit about some of your others and help us understand sort of how your writing has evolved from maybe some of the earlier books to where we are now with Rumor of Evil?
Right. Okay. So for about 40 years, I taught a course in science fiction. I taught a course in horror fiction, taught a course in detective fiction, taught a course in modern bestsellers, and I taught fiction writing. I mean, I had great courses. I proposed them all, and the department let me teach them. The first novel I selected for science fiction, because I was up against an awful lot of academic snobbery, was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which the overall message is watch out what you wish for. And my background is in physics, so I started writing not science fiction, but science thrillers, some kind of breakthrough scientifically that would appeal to the greatest number of readers, either fantasy or fear. And one of the early ones was called Elixir, about the development of an anti-aging drug and all the things that can go wrong with that, like you're completely turning over the nature of life. You can live indefinitely. So that came out and did very well and got a movie option by Ridley Scott, which is the reason why we have a name change from Gary Gashgarian to Gary Braver, but that's kind of a long story. I'll get into that. Yeah, we have time. So the charge was give us more high concept science thrillers that had very strong female characters in them, because 80% of the pieces of fiction in America are purchased by women. So strong, smart, sensitive women are applauded in the genre. So I had to keep on coming up with new hot topics. And the next book was called Gray Matter, which is based on the hysteria of parents in the 80s and 90s of wanting to raise geniuses, kids who are very bright. And there are all sorts of electronic devices, something called Baby Einstein and Baby Beethoven, that were recordings of music or mathematical games or word games, and Baby Shakespeare, that they would play for their infant children, hoping they'd turn out to be geniuses. And this was based on a Harvard study that you can turn your kid into a very smart person. And it's all ridiculous in any case. So Gray Matter was a secret medical procedure to boost the intelligence of slow kids. And then I went from that to my favorite aunt was fading away from Alzheimer's disease, and in flashback coming up with a cure for Alzheimer's that sends them back into reliving something deep in their past, like a closed circuit, which could be wonderful or horrific. And then Skin Deep, having this is cosmetic surgery, getting the face you weren't born with, the face of a celebrity. And that was really drawn from the Nip and Tuck days, an early television show that showed people before and after they had their faces changed and hoping to look like either Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie. And then one of the last ones, Tunnel Vision, trying to prove scientifically that there's an afterlife, and based on near-death experiences. The older I get, I'm very much in favor of an afterlife, but I'm not sure I believe in one. So in the last book I wrote with Tess Gerritsen, which became an international bestseller, and it was a murder mystery based on the Me Too movement. It was at the time that Harvey Weinstein and Matt Lauer and Charlie Rose were shamed, disgraced from their sexual misconduct. And so I've known Tess Gerritsen for 30 years. She said at a Christmas party, what do you say we write a book together? And I said, give me a nanosecond to think this over. I mean, she's got 30 books out and I have 10 or 12. So we decided to have an illicit affair, and I suggested a professor and a student. It's an old bottle, we put new wine in it. And I wrote the male point of view chapters, and she wrote the female point of view chapters. And over 16 months and a few telephone calls and email exchanges, Choose Me came out and to very wide appeal and good sales. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch. But I had gone from medical thrillers, biomedical thrillers, to murder mysteries, and this book, Rumor of Evil, is the first in a series. The second one is done. It's called Heat of the Night, which will come out next year, and I'm partway through the third one, which I don't have a title for yet. But kind of a long-winded
No, that's good. So, but the books you've written before were more standalones for the most part, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And now you've switched to the notion of writing series with these characters continuing I'm guessing their story arc continues as the books go on, even though the mysteries are solved within each book.
Correct.
Okay. And how do you hopefully you like these characters enough that they are now going to reside in your head a lot longer maybe than some of your others.
Mm-hmm. I like my characters. The advantage of writing a series is you have a handful of characters. You move from murder mystery to murder mystery. I very much like Kirk and Mandy and Olivia and the chief of police or the lieutenant, their boss. There's no problem coming up with new crimes to solve the mystery part. The problem, Stacy, is that as you go down the line, you begin to run out of personal baggage. And I've got something I'm working on now. The third book, I've got personal baggage. In particular, something that was introduced in Rumor of Evil. Olivia is nervous about the fact that some bad guy he put away in prison the rest of his life has a friend or hitman is going to come after them. You get down to book number 10 and you start running out of issues that endear the reader and make him sympathetic, trying to solve his personal problem. So that is one of the challenges for series novelists. And it's, I'm probably going to get to the point if I live long enough to write a series, a story number 10. Are we going to get a cat or a dog?
That is a dilemma. That is a dilemma. Yes.
Yeah. But not a very interesting one, I guess.
Well,
right.
you've got a lot of books out now. I'm curious, do you have other goals for yourself as a writer? I mean, other than seeing this series through to at least a number of books, do you have other goals, other things you still want to achieve on your author journey?
I'd love a movie. Yeah, I'd love a TV series. And, you don't keep those are in the back of the mind, not in the front of the mind. I'm retired now and I'm writing full time and I love it. I miss young people. I miss the high of a good class, but I have more time to write books, and that's really what I'm going to do. I can control these, and hopefully a publisher can sell a lot so they keep on going. And it would be great to get a movie, but I can't count on that because there are too many that are vying for the attention of movie producers. But we've had some nibbles. 3 of the books have been optioned, and like I said, Ridley Scott optioned Elixir 20 years ago and re-optioned it. He made Hannibal instead, and passed on this. But my books are very movie worthy. I was raised near a movie house in Hartford, Connecticut, and went often. And so I have a very cinematic mind, and I see the scene played on the inside of my skull, and sometimes just take dictation. So but I have hopes of continuing with what I can control, and maybe if we got a knock from Hollywood, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. You've been writing for a long time now, and you've been teaching others.
Yes.
The same sort of skills. Is there something that you find, for maybe all the writers or authors out there, is there something that you find makes a huge difference when you were teaching your students? If they learned a certain skill or mastered a certain concept, is there something out there that you found was sort of rang true each and every time, that if they did that, you saw a noticeable improvement in their writing? Yes.
Stacy, this sounds really strange, but I learned how to read when I became an English professor. What I mean by that is I began to look at another writer's work the way a carpenter looks at a house, noticing the symmetry, noticing the thematic development, noticing the various angles, how an author gets in and out of scenes, how chapters almost always end in cliffhangers, how these stories have lots of red herrings, false clues, how in a patch of dialogue, 8 inches, 10 inches of dialogue between 2 characters, the language, the style of their speech, how they look, how they dress, distinguishes them, how action scenes are followed by reflection scenes. In other words, fast scenes or dramatic high drama scenes followed by thought scenes and reflections of what just happened. How good writers show, don't tell. Instead of saying Stacy is angry, have Stacy pick up her coffee mug and slam it at the wall. And so I learned how to read closely because I always wanted to write. So I studied how the masters were doing it, from F. Scott Fitzgerald to Stephen King and beyond. And I read very slowly, and I passed that on to my writing students. Look, when you're reading these books, read not for plot. Read and see how they execute the scenes, how they flesh out their characters by what they say and how they think and what they do. And again, show, dramatize, don't tell. And be very careful of the language you use too. Try to think of fresh phrases instead of cliches and stale old sayings on tap. So 40 something years of teaching kids how to write and workshops in America and in Europe, I tried to pass that on. I always look at another person's writing, someone you would like to read, someone you emulate, some of your favorite authors, like a carpenter looks at a house. Yeah.
And you mentioned writing is something you always wanted to do, but I'm curious because you also mentioned your background was in physics. So you're now doing, it sounds like, what you always wanted to do. When did you decide you wanted to be a writer? Was it very early on? And why the circuitous route to get here?
Yes, right. Okay, good question. I had wanted to write in high school. I had two uncles who were scientists. One was a metallurgist, one was a chemist. And so they encouraged me and I had read science fiction by the pound, and I wanted to make a nuclear rocket to take me to the stars. So I majored in physics and went to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, just outside of 50 miles out of Boston. And I realized when I got to advanced thermodynamics lab, this wasn't working. My mind said I was much more interested in words than subatomic particles. And I started a humor magazine. I was the editor of the newspaper and editor of the yearbook. So I did a lot of writing, and that came easily to me. And so I exhausted all the English courses in the English department at Worcester Tech. And then I went across town and took courses in English at Clark University. And in summers, I took courses at Harvard. And so when I got out of physics and got my degree in physics, I had an equivalent to an English degree. And I then went on for a master's and doctorate. And it was such a relief to read Middlemarch or Vanity Fair and not have to worry about, quantum mechanics and thermodynamics. I love sitting in my dormitory reading these great books. And I said, I want to do this when I grow up because I had some very good professors. I just very much worshipped. And then, like I said, when I got to college, I learned how to read properly, and that got me into writing. I lucked out because my original office mate and my closest friend for 40 years turned out to be Robert B. Parker, who had published 60 internationally popular 60 novels, detective series based on Censor. And there are several movies with Tom Selleck that Bob Parker had written. And I watched him write his first 3 novels because his desk was practically on top of mine. And that demythologized the process, demystified the process. He'd write 3 or 4 pages a day, and after the end of the year, he'd have a 300-page book, and he sold them. And so that encouraged me to follow suit. And when I finally had an idea, it worked out. And it was easier publishing 40 years ago than today because there were fewer books out, and all the big publishers on the waterfront in New York City were looking for new young talent. Now they're overwhelmed by a lot of talent and just having get time to read the manuscripts that come in. So that's kind of how I started. But I never regretted having a physics degree because when I started teaching science fiction, I appreciated the science in science fiction and I could kind of talk about it. And when I needed to get experts in the fields, particularly biology. I never took a biology course in my life. I didn't know an amoeba from a kumquat. When I teaching at Northeastern, I can go to the biology department and say, I want to get from here to there and make me sound like I know what I'm talking about. So I knew how to ask scientists questions and could appreciate their answers. So my background paid off in that way too.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that the industry has changed a lot over the years. I'm curious, the challenges that you faced when you first started writing. Are they much the same as the challenges you face today, or have your own personal challenges changed as well?
The challenges in the past were not so much the writing or the sales, because once I finished Atlantis Fire, which is an archaeological thriller set on the island of Santorini in Greece, it was taken after I think the second submission, and then Kathy and I had children, and I was not exactly making princely wages as an English professor, so I had 5 textbooks that had be renewed every year. So I ended up having 38 editions over 38 years. So I had other stuff, but when the kids moved out of the house, or I had more time, it was the mid '90s that I started writing a lot more prolifically. What has changed is that there are too many people writing today, and yeah, it really is true. And not a lot of them are vetted by agents or even editors. In other words, self-publishing has caused a sea change, and it caused a tsunami of books to be written, and agents are struggling to find people they want to represent to get 15% of the sales that are good. And so in many ways, there are far too many manuscripts that are being written. And as an English teacher, my complaint is that self-published books are not very good, many of them, because as I said, you don't have an agent who first screens them and then passed on to a professional experienced editor at a major traditional publishing house. And you're paying $2,000 to have some printer print these up to, print up 100 copies for your relatives and friends, and that's it. The other issue is many manuscripts are now vetted by sensitivity editors hired by the publishing houses. Now I'm talking about the traditional publishing houses. They will hire sensitivity editors to go through the book and find anything that might be offensive, not just racially, but in terms of misogynistic or anything that might offend the readers. So Tess Garrison and I did Choose Me, and it was a terrific book. I loved the book. It did very well. Because we meshed very well as writers, it worked. But they hired Thomas and Mercer, owned by Amazon. They hired people to read our manuscripts and objected to certain words. For instance, I wrote the male point of view chapters as the professor. So in one scene, I have the professor address a student in his class whom he describes as chubby. Well, they said, scratch chubby, find a more innocent term, large or big, a muscular. He wasn't. He was fat, but I called him chubby. So the worry was that if you're going to have people out there who read this and they see that chubby as a derogatory term, might offend them. So anyone who might have had experiences being body shamed would take offense. So it wasn't like we had the N word or bad swears. It was some of these more sensitive issues that people derogatorily refer to as political correctness. And so you had to face this other hurdle or layer of getting it to production. So, some of the stuff that Tess wrote had to be changed, and some of the stuff that I wrote had to be changed. But we did not object because Amazon, the owner of the publishing company, their major resource is data. They know exactly what people like to read, and they were aware of their audience, a huge audience of females over 50. And so we became very cognizant of how that has changed books that are written or books that are published.
Interesting. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. It really is fascinating. It's a sea change. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe the flip side of that, what do you find has been the best part of this writing journey for you?
Cashing royalty checks.
It's a very honest answer. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think the second best thing about writing particularly with the pandemic, when Tess and I had Choose Me came out, we sat in front of our screens here and we addressed audiences in libraries and in bookstores and elsewhere with little squares on a screen. So we never had any, the fun part is going in front of a live audience of readers, particularly, let's say in a library, where people go there because they're readers, talking to them about what we did and taking questions and answers, which is really where all the fun is. What you're doing, Stacy. I mean, you ask a good question and we'd like to, spill out and tell you what we know to answer that question. I think in terms personally, and that's personal too. I mean, I love meeting real readers. Personally, if a review says good story, good characters, and well written, I'm an English professor, a former English professor. So when I say it's well written, that warms my heart, because I work very hard at having original expression and clever ways of saying things if I feel in a clever mood when I'm writing, instead of cliches and phrases on tap, as I said earlier. So phrasing the craft of the writing, that makes me feel good. I know my stories are interesting. They've all been interesting. And having taught for so many years, I know what makes a story interesting. And I know what makes a story seem well crafted. So, in a sense, I have that head start. It goes back to your earlier question, what I got out of teaching and how that's informed my writing. So I think that that would be that's a heart warmer for me. If they said it's nicely written story.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to learn more about you, new releases, things you have going on, that sort of thing, where can they go to find you and that information?
Okay. The name is Gary Braver. So it's www.garybraver, GARYBRAVER, one word, garybraver.com. That's my website. It's been updated and it's got all the events coming up and other stuff about the 10 books that I've written and highlighting certainly Rumor of Evil. Yeah.
Good. Well, and if people want to purchase a copy of your books, particularly your newest, Rumor of Evil, where can they go to buy them?
Go to any bookstore and ask for it if they haven't got it on the shelves, or Amazon or Kobo or Google Play or many of the others, Books A Million, Goodreads, and they're all on my website, garybraver.com, with buttons you can press and instantly purchase a book from any of those platforms. And if you love the book, please give a great review, a star review on Amazon. If you don't love the book, lie.
A reasonable request.
Right.
Well, Gary, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast, and I want to wish you luck with Rumor of Evil and books 2 and 3. We'll look forward to those. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Thank you, Stacy. It was a pleasure being with you. You asked good questions, really. It was a delight. Thank you.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.